Hey, welcome back to Free Period, where I, Steve, talk about the most recent episode of Fantasy High Junior Year, Rock the Boat. Now, I'm just gonna get out of the way. Blimey, done. I've said it. We're moving forward. Just so that you know, we will be talking about spoilers for Rock the Boat, the most recent episode of Fantasy High Junior Year, and of course, the previous episode. So if you haven't watched it, go watch it, watch this. But if you have watched it, then let's talk about what I want to focus on for this episode, which is amusingly, conversely, combat and high-level problems that I've seen previously that really nails it in this episode. We're going to talk about the combat of rocking the boat and piling it on. Let's give it some context, right? So the combat happens in the Hangman, not the motorcycle, but the ship, Fabian's home. And it happens in the sky, right? And it's a confluence of mysteries that have been laid out and actions that have happened deeply in previous episodes. So now we're up in the sky. We're up in the sky, and Oshin from the Rat Grinders has summoned forth a number of dragons to call for help. Now, we don't see any of the Rat Grinders here. It was done through like a fun little ping pong magic spell runic trick to get all this to pop off. Number one, of course, the battle miniatures were great. The cloud battlefield with the house ship, the hangman, all the dragons coming in was super awesome. And why I want to talk about piling it on specifically is that the bad kids, the photosynth kids, are high enough level at this point where they can do some real damage, and they are hard to knock down. So here is how Brennan used piling it on mechanics in something that when you describe on paper feels unfair of a combat. But let me explain how this works, why it can work at other tables, and how this is extremely narratively satisfying. So, combat pops off and a bunch of dragons start coming in. More dragons are going to be coming in round after round. And some of them are bigger, like the two-headed red dragon. Some of them are smaller and they're easier to knock off. Now, the ship has cannons. The ship is also hosting an end-of-the-year party and has a bunch of NPCs that don't know what's going on, namely, almost the entire school. So the bad kids, photosynth kids have to manage the fact that they are trying to get Kristen elected. They need to get her elected so that the plan to resurrect Ankarna and then feed that into Porter so that Porter can become a new god of rage and wrath and war and conquest. It needs to be Kristen Applebee's, not Kipper Lily Copperkettle. So they got to get the voting happening. That's being managed by Jawbone and everything, which means they got to keep the party going enough rounds so that enough votes can happen. There's a dice mechanic to roll on that, and they've got to keep the crowd calm, which means one of the bad kids needs to at least focus on that. Another bad kid needs to go up and steer the ship. Now, it ends up being Gorgug with a little bit of help from the NPC that's part of the aviation club. There's a lot of fun gimmicks there. But Gorgug's got to be on top of the ship, which means Gorgug is right there, right for dragon breath weapons. And Brennan does not get shy. They all start with their breath weapon attacks. He doesn't hold back. He understands that Gorgug's a barbarian. He can take quite a bit of damage. And these damages are anywhere between 20 to 80 if you don't save. There was a lot of saving on Gorgug's part, which you have to assume at medium to high levels. Your party's going to save more often than not. So it's doing damage in the version of 10, 15, maybe 20 damage to upwards of 40 damage. But there's a lot of dragons unloading breath weapons. So Gorgug's almost immediately sub-half hit points, which is huge for a barbarian. Even when they're not raging, they are a pretty deep hit point well. On top of that, you've got to deal with these dragons. Now, there's guns on the ship, but there's mechanics about how fast you can load the guns. They're very powerful, but they require multiple people and coordination. And then you've got to deal with the fact that eventually Cassandra / Nightmare King is sort of appearing in the clouds. That's going to have a swipe mechanic that they only had to deal with. And the ship itself, even though Adine's sister put some warding up, is also something that needs to not fall out of the sky and die. So Gorgug's rolling dex checks and constitution saves and all these things for himself and the ship, right? You've got Adine back there trying to help damage the dragons, but it's got to be cautious work, right? It's got to be cautious work because Adine's a wizard and can't take that much damage. You've got NPCs that you can bring in, but if you let the NPCs know what's going on, instead of hiding it under the guise of a music video, which is an excellent play, it may cause panic. You need a certain number of votes to go in. You have dragon after dragon after dragon. I think all in total, there were like 8 of them of varying sizes and degrees that the bad kids were trying to deal with. It wasn't like they were near each other, so AoE spells are kind of out of the gate, so you just gotta lay in that damage. Now, Riz, Kristen, like Adine, all helped with the damage, and then Gorgug was eventually able to swing a couple times as well. Fabian had to kind of manage the party, and Fig had to kind of manage the party until Fig went out afield. But then there was the, falling from the sky if you physically left the ship. It created a very limiting zone about survivability as they approached the giant Cassandra. Now, we all know what happened. We all know divine intervention. If you watch the after party, you know that it's completely buttoned up. I don't have buttons on this shirt. I don't know why I went to button a shirt that doesn't have buttons. It's buttoned up mechanically. Like, it was ridiculous. It was very funny. But this combat was treacherous. Gorgug went down twice. The moment anyone was hit beside Gorgug, they were pretty much at 2/3 to a half hit points. So no one could get hit more than a couple times without it being dire straits, which put the Photosynthekids on a very defensive position. But they killed a fair amount of dragons, they unloaded that big damage, and they're moving into another fight immediately. Now at this point, we don't know if Brennan's going to give them like bonus spells or some of their actions back, or a long rest or a short rest or what have you. But they already have popped off a number of their abilities moving into another fight, in a situation where it wasn't really about their survival, even though it was harrowing. It was very clear if they didn't deal with this right, if they didn't focus up as a group, these dragons were going to take them down. It was about keeping the ship aloft, getting them from point A to point B, namely the gymnasium at Egg Forts, and most importantly, it was about getting those votes in play, which means that they had almost guaranteed a few rounds that they had to go before they could unlock one of the members of the team to focus on the battle. So they were one person down. The entire surface of the ship, the entire exposed section of the ship, was incredibly dangerous to survive because it was just breath weapons, and then rolling to get breath weapons back. But it was a building battle to the next battle, so it also drained resources. Why am I so excited about this? I'm excited about it because this felt like a significant plot battle, even though it was a step to the climactic battle. It did the job of draining the resources, not all of them, but some of them, and injuring some of the party members and putting them on their back foot, without actually doing something that was particularly drawn out. It was only like a 2-hour episode, like not long for a high-level battle. Honestly, I think it was like an hour and 30 minutes of combat, which for 6 players plus a bunch of dragons and some NPCs and of course bits, it's a pretty easy length for it. It led to a not so much chase scene or like driving scene. We've seen those combats in Dimension 20 before, but journey scene. It could have gone really wrong. They could have crashed and then there would have been some sort of like survive the crash and then still get yourself to the gymnasium thing. They know that the ritual to make Porter the new god won't work because they don't have the correct name. Or at least they mostly know that. They suspect maybe there was something that could be a problem. And we saw like a cameo appearance of some of the rat grinders, but then they bounced out. They now need to get to that gymnasium, make sure Kristen becomes the president, inevitably fight more, and deal with the rat grinders front and center and Porter. When you put together your kind of climactic combat for an arc, because like, let's be clear, Dimension 20, even though it's 20 episodes and everything, it's a season of television. It's not like a Critical Role season that has like 160, 170 episodes to get to a climax fight. This is the season finale more. So when you get there, you want it to feel strong, you want it to feel big, you want it to feel tense, you want it to have stakes. And what this did was it took the scale up to dragons. We all love fighting dragons, right? In D&D. It took the situation, which is going to be very different than them individually on the ground in a gymnasium. It does the thing that the photosynthesis kids are good at, which is managing a bunch of variables and shoring up and strategizing to like push through. And it continues to kind of blanket that even though this season isn't fully about Cassandra, it is about Cassandra, right? The Nightmare King was still a threat. The big swipe, they managed to dodge it, but the big swipe would have absolutely shattered the ship, right? Absolutely been destructive. All right, so how can we use this? When you're planning your big set pieces for arcs or campaigns and everything like that, think about how the battles will be different. This is good in any storytelling. They're moving from a sky battle where they're small and protecting a zone and sort of defending it and surviving rounds to something where they're going to have to execute a conclusion. Whether that means murdering kids, convincing them on the other side, they will have to conclude this. This first dragon battle, the Rock the Boat battle, is about surviving to that. And they did a very good job at showing all of the threats. Brennan did a great job at being like, this is not a light combat, but it's a great way to pile on the threats. Again, more than half a dozen dragons coming for you, absolutely ripping into your ship, absolutely ripping into the thing. You've got to keep the party calm, which means the characters with good charisma scores have to be somewhat focused on that. You've got to make sure that it survives long enough to get the votes. Then you kind of get the hangman to the location. You have lots of variables that you're doing, and the damage is just consistently happening, almost like an environmental effect. You're taking out dragons, you're taking out ones that are doing damage here and there, but the big ones, you know, you need a group to focus on. It required setup and coordination and adding in more combatants, adding in more cannon guns, letting Gorgug get to the point where he could steer and swing with his returning blade, and so that he could stack in the damage. Having Fig go out on their fucking flaming hell steed nightmare and dropping in those smites, because those bigger dragons, those medium and large sized dragons, they weren't gonna go down easy. Anyway, it was a great episode. It was phenomenal, and I am so excited for the penultimate episode that's coming, part 1 of the season finale. It was everything I could hope for, and I hope only that the season finale continues this trend of keeping the photosynth kids on their back foot and trusting that they have the strategy, skill, and ability to pull out a miraculous win. And I think that this was a good setup for that. Brennan Lee Mulligan is one of the greatest GMs of all time, clearly. And I think that one of the hardest things as a GM is to do mid to high level combat, especially with 6 players, because it is so hard to not just absolutely crush them under your feet or resist the urge to pull back, because you're like, that doesn't seem fair. It is fair. They can do it. They are clever. Always trust your players at the table, that they will figure out a way to foil you as a GM. All right, that's it. If you like this video and you agree with me, you disagree with me and everything, comment below, follow, like, subscribe, all the YouTube things, and check out my video tomorrow on last week's episode of Worlds Beyond Number, where I talk about how Brennan piles it on in a different